Welcome to the A Minute to Midnight show. This is Tony. On today's show we have Ralph Epperson, and this will be a show I think a bit different than anything you would have probably heard before. Very, very interesting, fascinating stuff. The connection with Ralph is a little bit dodgy in places, so sorry about that. There's a few little dropouts here and there, but I hope you enjoy listening to it as much as I enjoyed having the conversation with Ralph. I want to welcome back to the A Minute to Midnight show Ralph Epperson. We had Ralph on the show a few weeks ago and a lot of people said we got to get him back. So I'm pleased to be able to have you back so quickly again, Ralph. It's good to be chatting to you today.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. It's always my pleasure, and I'm happy to do what I can to assist. I have some things to say, and I think they'll be of interest to your listeners.
That sounds great. I'm sure they will be. The last show was fascinating. I was thinking before we get into the main subject, there was another shooting in the US recently, another school shooting. I'm wondering, it's certainly inflamed a lot of debate and angst. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the whole thing.
Well, I'll just make it very brief. Since the shooting, it's come out that the FBI had plenty of opportunities to prevent it. And this local police department did, and they did nothing. They allowed him to do this. They had something like, maybe you've already heard these figures, something like 30 police visits. The FBI was notified at least twice that this man had put a comment on the Facebook that or some sort of, I guess it was Facebook, that he wanted to be a school shooter, a occupation as a school shooter. And yet no one stopped it. They could have stopped it. And so the question is, why would the FBI want to do that? And I heard a review on another talk show, it's a nationwide one, and he said he listed about the last 6 or 8 of these. And the FBI had ample opportunity in all 6 or 8 of them, and they did nothing. That's scary. What is the FBI? Why are they not doing their job? They get the story, they check it out, but then they do nothing about getting him out or stopping him or getting his rifle or nothing. So that's scary. That's about all I know. It certainly is a tragic day for the 17 people who lost their couples or was who lost their child. And I was just, before I got on the air with you today, I skimmed a location that had the comments made by the students who were in the school while it was happening. Mom and Dad, I'm scared to death. I don't know where to go. There's been shooting, but Mom, I want you to know I love you. This kind of thing, over and over again. It's just scary, and I'm very disappointed in the FBI.
Well, I saw one comment where the FBI had apparently been reported to them, and then they said they couldn't trace it. I mean, it's like, hello, a second. The FBI can trace anybody and anything, That's sort of hardly added up to me. But anyway, yeah, it is sad for the people that lost their lives. The other thing is, I think he said something like he wanted to be a professional shooter or some words to that effect, which kind of makes you think that was somebody training him. I don't know,
Well, that's the thing we don't know yet, and we might never know, just like we don't know in the shooting in Las Vegas. We still don't know what his motive was, or whether there was a second shooter. None of that information's come out yet. And I want to know why. Why is it taking, it's 3 or 4 months since that thing happened.
Yeah, well, maybe there's things that they don't want to come out because they'll have to change the whole official story. But yeah, it's, I guess the thing is now it's being used to enrage people against the whole gun thing, so you get that debate, which, being here in New Zealand, our laws are completely different, so I don't kind of get too much into that, but I don't know, it's an unusual situation. America's quite different than anywhere else when it comes to that.
Well, I've been on Facebook. I'm on Facebook every day, and I go on there and I've been pointing out that we should, here in America, maybe your cable as well is doing this. They're saying there's a new medication out if you got the following problems, And then they say, if you got the hangnails and the broken blood vessels, we can fix it with this medication. But however, there are symptoms. And quite often, one of those symptoms is tell your doctor if you start having thoughts of committing suicide. Notice that all of the shooters until this one always commit suicide, which tends to make you believe that these medications are being given to these students when they get depressed and they have thoughts of not only committing suicide, but an act of violent. The way to do it would be to die in a school shooting. And I think we as the American people have the right to know this. And I'm urging that we there's a thing called patient physician confidentiality, which means the doctor can't tell you whether he was giving a medication and what it was. I think we have the right to know that they were getting medication, and that medication could cause them to do the shooting and to commit suicide. So I've been getting that on the internet every day when I can think of it, on Facebook to say, let's start listening and find out about these medications that can cause you to commit suicide.
Good point. Yes, very good point. Now, the main subject we have today is a bit of an unusual one. So can you let our listeners know what it is?
Yes, our subject matter is today Jesse James, the famous outlaw. Just this last week, in like 7 days, there's been 3 different movies on my cable here in Tucson, Arizona, probably nationwide, about Jesse James. This thing happens every week. There's always another one. There's probably, I don't know, maybe 20 of them. They keep re-showing them, which means we in America still know about this outlaw. But I want you to know we don't know about this outlaw, and that's what we're going to talk about very briefly. Jesse James lived to be 103 years of age. The famous outlaw, not some guy in Topeka that claimed to be Jesse James. The real Jesse James lived to be 103, and not one of these movies ever covers that. They always have him being shot by Bob Ford, and that's the end of the story. That's utter balderdash. I've looked into this thing since 1973, I think it was. That's what, 27 and 18, 35 or 45 years into this man's story. And I'm convinced he was a major, and I mean a major player in America's past between 1882, when he allegedly died, and about 1925. He died in 1951, but the last 26 years of his life he was out of the public eye. But he stayed in the public eye until 1925, and he killed off, I believe he bribed a physician to claim that he died in 1925 of pneumonia. And of course, when you die of pneumonia, the doctor certifies you're dead, but there's no autopsy to see if there was any foul play. And that's what Jesse James did to kill off the name William Andrews Clark, because under that name, Jesse was a United States Senator. He was called one of the richest men in the world. In fact, was actually called the richest man in the world. He was called one of 100 who ruled America. He was called one of 100 who owned America. Jesse James, the famous outlaw.
So, yeah, can you tell us the name of the person you believe was Jesse James again there, Ralph?
Yes, Jesse James. The first book I read on this was in 1973. I read the book. It was published a few years before that, but I read it, and it claimed that a man by the name of J. Frank Dalton showed up at 101 in Lawton, Oklahoma, claiming to be the real Jesse. And the newspaper didn't believe him because Jesse died in 1882. So they assigned 2 reporters at the station onto the story, and they interviewed him exhaustively, and they published a little booklet that claimed that he was the real Jesse. That story went nationwide. And then later on, other authors went to him, and a couple of them went and they wrote this book that I read. And in that book, he claimed that Jesse had 73 different aliases. Now, here in America, we can't do that because once you're get your Social Security card, you have to have a real name. So if you want to fly on an airplane today, you have to have some evidence that you're the real person. That say you want to go out as Bill Smith, you got to have some evidence that you're Bill Smith, and even by your name is Ralph Epperson. So it's not as easy. But one of those names was William Andrews Clark, and that's the one where he, under that alias, this man is a major figure in America's past. And we'll briefly cover some of those things that I think my DVDs, by the way, they're going to be uploaded within the next couple of days. There'll be 4 1-hour segments. And I'm urging your listeners to just wait, be patient, a day or two, maybe 3 or 4 days. Look for Jesse James Lived to Be 103 and watch all 4 hours. I'm going to blow your mind with what this man got involved with, and I'll just briefly cover it in the approximate hour you and I have.
That sounds good, Ralph. Okay, so some listeners are probably going to be going, "Are you sure it's the right man? Or is this just a theory?"
Oh no, I can assure you, it's first of all, you got to understand that this was an outlaw, and he tried to conceal his identity, being Jesse James. But I've got all sorts of physical evidence that it was him. One of which I'll just briefly mention when we get there about the Civil War. I'll make the point now. Jesse James, every author that I read on the subject claimed that Jesse James and his family were Southern supporters before and during the Civil War. Well, Frank James, who was 4 years older, I think it was maybe 2 years older, he went off to join I can't remember the band's name. The Marauders. The word for it. Again, I can't think of the guy's name. But anyway, he went off to join the guerrillas, and a squad of Northern troops came to the farm and went and found the father-in-law, Jesse's father-in-law, there, Jesse's stepfather, forgive me, and they strung him up and threatened him. You tell us where Frank James is and the guerrillas army is, and let us know. We're going to go attack him. And the guy refused to tell him. And Jesse heard this. He was out in the field working. He came running up, and they captured him and strung him up. And he wouldn't talk either. They actually burned his feet. And that has been recorded by every writer I've ever read. Now, when this man Dalton died, they did an autopsy on his body, and his feet showed signs of being burnt. They had turned black. I asked my doctor about this. I said, "Have you ever heard," my personal physician, just my doctor, I said, "Have you ever heard that they used tar to heal burns?" He said, "Yes. There was an old wives' tale that when you get a bad burn, you put tar on it, and apparently it'll help you heal." I said, "Will that tar turn the area black?" And he said, "Absolutely." Now, this is only one of various documentations that Dalton had burned feet, and so did Jesse James. That's only one. There's about 3 others where physical evidences were given by Dalton. The Police Gazette magazine did a story on him. They checked with the Pinkerton Detective Agency, who there were very few pictures of Jesse. So in all the wanted posters, they just had a drawing because there were no pictures of him. So they found out. They say they'd go to someone who claimed to see Jesse, and they said, "Well, we shot him 3 times in his right arm and left arm and in his right leg," and the Pinkerton made a list of those things, and they later on had about 8 or 10 different identifiable marks on his body that wouldn't go away. So when the Police Gazette found him in 1948, they actually looked at Dalton's body, and they found the identical same marks that the Pinkerton Detective Agency did. There was a full autopsy done on J. Frank Dalton by the sheriff and the coroner and one other man from the mortuary, and they certified that Dalton had the same marks that they had in the Police Gazette and they had from the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Plus, when Dalton surfaced, the story went nationwide. Hundreds and hundreds of people went to Lawton, Oklahoma to meet this old man. And they were encouraged to pick his mind. Here was a man who was 100, at that time, 101 years old, and hundreds of people went to him. And in the original book I read, there were 30, I think it was 31 sworn affidavit statements like, I know this man was the real one because he knew things that I knew and we knew together in 1860 or 48 when he was born, or we were children playing in his backyard. So there's all sorts of evidence, and people have just never put it together like I've done in these 4 hours of the DVD. I'm 99% convinced it's the same man.
That's very interesting. So you mentioned that he was very wealthy. So under what name was he wealthy, and can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, let's do it. We'll briefly cover the story of William Andrews Clark. That's the name. William Andrews Clark built a railroad from Los Angeles to Salt Lake City when he lived in L.A. Or maybe not. He might have lived in Utah. But anyway, there was a need for a railroad, so he built it. He built it with private funds. He did not borrow. He did not create a corporation. He had no partners. And I think, the only reason I believe he did that was he was afraid these guys would want to know more about him. And when they did, they'd find out the connection between Dalton or Clark and Jesse James. So he kept it secret. Now, he needed water for his steam engines of his railroad. And if you draw a line between LA and Salt Lake City, you go through the town of Las Vegas, which in 1900 was just a small tent city. Miners were up in the hills and came down at nighttime to spend, and they joined together and built a little tent city. They called it Las Vegas. So he needed water, so he bought a 10,000-acre ranch that had water rights, and he put his railroad right through the middle of it. And then the way to get customers in Las Vegas was he took part of that land and laid out the downtown section of Las Vegas. And when you go there, you'll know that there's the old downtown section and then what they call the Strip, which is the long highway. But of course, they built all of these casinos, and that thing must run for, 15 or 10 miles, 20 miles. It's a long stretch. But there's two sections. The old section where the original casinos were built, and then when it got popular, they built the Strip. So you can go downtown. And I show you the way that he laid it out. I found the map, and it's identical to the old downtown section. Now, for the Las Vegas was in in Lincoln County in Nevada. And there was a long, narrow county, so the legislature divided the county in half and named the southern part Clark County after William Andrews Clark, meaning the original Jesse James. They don't know that there. I've tried to get them to know that, and they won't listen. I've gone to the museum. There's a Clark County Museum I think it's outside in a little city called Boulder or something. So I went there to the museum and said, how much can you tell me about William Andrews Clark? And they said nothing. It says Clark County on the outside wall, but no one knows anything about this man. They had a book on on Clark County. There wasn't one picture and only a short paragraph in the entire book about William Andrews Clark. So that's further evidence. Now, Clark, where did the money come from him to become the richest man in the world? And that is involved with the guerrillas and the army. Jesse James, later after he was burned and was hung by the Northern troops, he decided to join at 15 years of age. So he went riding off to the guerrillas, and the first guy decided, Quantrell, that's it, Quantrell's Raiders, they were called. Quantrell said, you're too young, but you might check with Bloody Bill Anderson, who had a separate group under the command of Quantrell. So he went to see Bloody Bill, and Bloody Bill says, listen, if you want to fight, you can join us. During that process, Jesse learned about the Knights of the Golden Circle. And when I was writing my first book in '85, I wanted to find out all I could about the Knights of the Golden Circle, and I skimmed every one of the 30 or so books on the Civil War in the bookstore where I went, a used bookstore, and not one mentioned them. Not one. And yet they were the ones who planned the Civil War in 1837. It didn't start for 24 years, but it started in 1861. Jesse learned about that and joined the Knights of the Golden Circle. Now, later on, I'll have to do it in a couple of sentences, but the American Revolution, the War of 1812, and the Civil War are all connected with the attempt of the European and American bankers to create a federal reserve in our nation. And it failed in the American Revolution. It failed in the War of 1812. So they planned the Civil War to force the North into creating a central bank. Lincoln did not create a central bank. He issued the greenback dollar, and he didn't borrow it. It was just issued to pay for the cost of the rifles and the soldiers' salaries and the horses and the cannon and whatever else they needed. So Clark, later on, because he survived and did a lot of work for this Knights of the Golden Circle, they planned a second Civil War after the first one did not succeed. So they didn't get the central bank that they wanted. So they killed Abraham Lincoln. John Wilkes Booth was a member of the Knights of the Golden Circle. And he was the one who took orders and assassinated Lincoln. And Lincoln, after the shooting, he escaped and went out what they call the Navy Yard Bridge. I got a picture of it in my DVD, and you'll see it. And he escaped, and Stanton, who was Secretary of the war was only over about a week or so, he issued orders to blockade 7 of the 8 roads leading out of Washington, D.C., and he missed, by the strangest coincidence, is the Navy Yard Bridge, and that's the one that Booth took. Now, Booth, well, let's cover this. Let's do it this way. I'll cover back Booth if we have time. That's another story on its own. Anyway, the Knights of the Golden Circle buried $8 billion with a B, banana, $8 billion of gold in the South and the West, and in caves and holes and mines, anywhere they could find it, and then marked them that they were Knights of the Golden Circle depositories. The Knights of the Golden Circle created the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, in 1867, 2 years after the war ended. And the Ku Klux Klan was to go to the South and start black and white riots to foment a second civil war. And then you would use the $8 billion in gold as a way to fund it. That never came off. The people in the South and North had had enough of civil war, and they didn't play the game. Now, Jesse got stuck with $8 billion in gold. And Clark said, I know what I can do. I can get in the copper industry in Butte, Montana. And he became multi-billionaire. He was called the wealthiest man in the world with $7 billion in gold. Now his. The Knights of Gold just abandoned it, apparently. So Jesse became the wealthiest man in the world. He became one of the 100 who ruled America, one of the 100 who owned America. This group was responsible for the murder of 4, count them, 4 of the American presidents: Lincoln, McKinley, Garfield, and Harding. Jesse was right in the middle of all of those assassinations as the legitimate ruler, president of the Knights of the Golden Circle. That's how important this man was. He got into the copper industry just when Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. Well, you need copper wire to lay down to get the electricity to flow into the light bulb. He got in there just at the time the automobile industry was building the cars, which needed copper wires for the motors, the engines. He made billions of dollars with the $1 billion of gold that he owned as the head of the Knights of the Golden Circle. And I'll just make that one more comment one more time. I would dare say, even today, if you open up any history book on the Civil War, you'll not find the Knights of the Golden Circle. There's only one book that I know of that did that, and that's called The Unseen Hand by that unknown author living in Tucson, Arizona, named A. Ralph Epperson.
So how did you find out about the Knights of the Golden Circle then?
It was all mentioned in that first book I read, because that book covered basically a lot, not all, but a lot of what J. Frank Dalton was confessing to when he was being interviewed by not only book authors, but hundreds and hundreds of people. I went to meet him in Lawton, Oklahoma.
So what is the proof or the evidence that Dalton and Clark were the same person?
Well, that's part of it. Let's just go back. Oh, yeah, okay, that's a better example. Okay, now, right after the assassination, within a month or so, back in 1882, Jesse killed, and there's a whole story in this and why he picked this particular man, but he killed another man and drugged the body. He shot him in the barn early in the morning when he went out to get the horse or something, and he killed him and drug his body in, and the widow came out and said, "You killed my husband." "Yes, I did." "Well, what did you do that for?" And he said, "Listen, here's what I want you to do. I want you to tell the sheriff, when you call the sheriff and say, 'My husband's dead on the floor and he was shot by a man. He was shot by Bob Ford.' I want you to tell him he was shot by Bob Ford, and then I want you to tell the sheriff that the man on the floor is Jesse James, the famous outlaw. I want you to change the names of your two children, and they'll become Jesse James Jr., and then the other little girl will be Susan James, the name of Jesse's sister. Jesse had a sister between his mother and his brother Frank. So, and he gave that widow $15,000. Now, what would $15,000 in 1882 be worth today? That was a bundle. Cowboys made $30 a month if they were lucky. So that's $360. She got $15,000, and she played the game. And here's the key. She then issued a photograph, because it was the first one that they could ever certify was really Jesse. And it's a little, I would guess it's 5x8 or something, very big, and it looks like a piece of cardboard that had a hole punched in the center, and then you stuck a photograph, glued it or stuck it on to the back, and then issued it as a frame and a picture. And she had the people that did that print on the label on the bottom, "This is to certify this is the only known photograph of Jesse James, signed Mrs. Jesse James in 1882. That has been the picture used by everyone who studies the Jesse James story. It's when you go to a Old West bookstore or someplace, and they got postcards of Jesse James and Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday. The one of Jesse James is a picture of this one issued by Mrs. Clark. An author by the name of Frank Triplett, got in touch with the widow and the mother, Zerelda James, the mother of Jesse, Frank, and Susan, and the three of them wrote a book called The Life and Treacherous Times of Jesse James. And on the cover, they put this portrait. Now, that's been the portrait since 1882 to about 1960 or 1980, something like that, when they finally published the paperback edition of the book. The picture has changed. It's a new picture. The old one, certified to be the real one, only one of Jesse, has disappeared. There's a new picture. Where did that picture come from? And I believe it came from a picture of J. Frank Dalton sitting in a chair with a big frame in his lap, turned in such a way that it's at an angle. He can look at it as he's sitting in the chair. And the photographer took a picture of him looking at this frame. And it looks like he's looking. There's 3 pictures in the frame. It's not one picture of 3 people. It's 3 individual people glued into a picture to make it look like a portrait of 3. And he's looking at the one in the lower right-hand corner. And that picture, I think, was discovered by the people that were publishing the triplet book and said, my God, that's the real picture of Jesse James. Dalton's looking at it as a way of saying to his friends and neighbors, if you know that picture of being me, my gang members alive in 48, or people that knew me in the guerrilla army or in the Civil War of the Knights, that's the real picture of Jesse James. So they substituted that now, and that now becomes the only known official photograph of Jesse James.
Wow, that's really interesting. So how did you manage to find out the $15,000 figure?
The $7 billion?
No, the $15,000 that would paid to the widow.
Once again, Dalton talked about it in that first book, or even in the other books. There's been probably 50 books written on Jesse James. I've read all of the major ones. There's probably 30 of them. I've got them here red, underlined, and then I footnoted them in my book that I published, that was what happened. The sheriff showed up, and he said, who's the man? Who's your husband? Well, it's Jesse James. The famous outlaw? Yes. A neighbor living a couple of doors away later surfaced during the funeral and said that Jesse was in the town, and he knew Jesse, the original. And he said that Jesse James attended his own funeral. He sang in the choir. He carried the casket. These are just the incidental things that are so mind-boggling. Jesse James, Dalton claimed that he had a piece of metal rigged so he could stick it under his front lip so that he could change his outward appearance. So people said, you look like Jesse. Oh, no, I'm not. His name was Vaughn at the time, Tom Vaughn. I'm Tom Vaughn. I'm not Jesse. But his next-door neighbor said he was. And shortly after there, something like 21 people claimed to be the real Jesse James. In reality, they're all proven to be false, except for Dalton. By the way, let's go over that very quickly. J. Frank Dalton was the name this man was using. J for Jesse, Frank for Frank James' brother, Dalton for his mother's original name before she was adopted. Only a cousin later on, years later in 1948, found out that she was related to the sister of Zerelda, and the sister and Zerelda were both adopted by the Cole family. And everybody says, no, it was Zerelda Cole was her married name. No, descendants of this sister of Zerelda admitted she was named Dalton until she was adopted with her older sister to the Cole family, and she lived under that until she got married. These are just things that incidental, but they're not incidental. It's his way of identifying himself as being the real Jesse James.
Very interesting. Now, you mentioned him being a senator. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. When he got to Butte, Montana in around 1900, or approximately plus or minus, he got into the copper, as I said, just at the right time when Edison invented the light bulb, and it means he's going to need millions and millions of copper wire for the hooking up your house to receive electricity. And he got into that business and made a killing with the $7 billion that he had in gold. He actually got into he built the railroad, which was the only one. He sold it about 1908 or something. But when he got to Montana, it was a territory, not a state. And so he decided to run for the Senate. He was probably the best known person in that state. So he decided to run. And the state legislature, he actually bribed the state legislators to date. They were the ones who, before it became a state under the Constitution, they decided to send him to the U.S. Congress as a territory, and they made him the senator. The Senate found out all these people who were bribed. Many of them testified that that Clark actually bribed him. So he waited until 1901 the second time, and he got it cleared. He actually did it normally, and they made him a senator. He sat in the Senate for one term, 1901 to 1907. So I went back to 1901 and found his name on the list of senators to confirm it. I checked with the various other books that were written about Clark. They all say he was a senator. And so even the people that were working for him, those people, many of them wrote books about Clark, and they said he was a senator. So there's no question that he was a senator in the United States, Jesse James, under the alias of William Andrews Clark.
So were there any pictures of Clark under that name?
Oh, yes. I've got probably 50 of them in my files. Every time I find one, I photocopy it, and I've got a folder in them.
And does he look exactly the same as Dalton?
Oh, yes. There's no question about it. Well, this is the point. The last picture of him was taken when he was about 78, I think, when he allegedly died in 1925. Now, the pictures of Dalton are at 100. But you could put the two side by side, and it's an amazing similarity. I don't have a facial picture of Dalton. They're all taken from angles, looking to the right or the left, or small pictures when he's laying on a bed or something. So I can't do a facial recognition on him. But I show you the pictures on my DVD, and you've got to conclude 90% it's the same man. Maybe 25 years later, but it's the same man.
Very interesting. Yeah. What else can you tell us that might be interesting?
Okay, let's go back to the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. John Wilkes Booth was ordered by the Knights of the Golden Circle to take Lincoln out. And also two more men they were just friends of Booth's. The three of them were going to assassinate Vice President Andrew Johnson, Secretary of State Seward, and Abraham Lincoln. And if all three of those men were assassinated at the same time, at the same date, who would become president? They had no procedure. This is why they had a vice president. If the president dies in office, the vice president becomes the president. But what if the vice president dies in office? They had no procedure. They didn't know what they did. There was no way in the Constitution. It's not spelled out. So they had a real quandary. So that's why Stanton decided to take over in Washington, D.C., because he was the Secretary of War, and he could order generals, et cetera, to do things. They blockaded 7 of the roads. Now, Booth was allowed to escape by Stanton himself, Secretary of War, by not blockading the Navy Yard Bridge. 7 others got soldiers to stop people who were signed within hours, within minutes probably, of the death of Lincoln. They were told, go to the so-and-so road and stop anyone going out of the city, or at least certify who they are. And here's what we know Booth looked like. He did. So it's quite likely that Stanton would have become president of the United States. And Stanton was directly involved in the assassination of Abraham Lincoln.
Was Stanton a member of the Knights of the Golden Circle?
I can find no direct evidence of that, because the only evidence I have is the mention of the group, and then there's a sign that some of these people give with their right arm called the lion's paw. And I've got pictures of Jesse doing that, and maybe 3 or 4 others, including Bloody Bill Anderson, giving a sign with his right arm. And so Stanton, I can not find any pictures of Stanton doing that, so I don't know for sure. But I do know this: he was the most powerful one man left, because the vice president had been shot and wounded. They didn't kill him, but if he had killed him and they had killed Seward, that left only Stanton. And Stanton was assuming control of the government anyway already upon the death of Lincoln. Before Johnson was elevated, they tried to what's the word? Impeach Johnson. Andrew Johnson stepped up to become president when Lincoln passed away, and they tried to impeach him. Came within one vote of doing so, and there's all sorts of theories as to why they did it. My own theory, but the basic theory was that Johnson agreed to continue the policy of Lincoln, which was to welcome the South back into the Union, even though they had seceded from it, on only one condition: that you pledge allegiance to the Union as you did before, and once you come in, there'll be no punishment. And the Golden Circle didn't want that because they wanted a second Civil War. So they tried to remove Johnson. Now, they didn't poison him, shoot him like they did with Lincoln, but they tried to impeach him, and it came within one vote. But if that had happened, the Civil War would have happened, the second Civil War, but it didn't.
So the Knights of the Golden Circle, do you think they would have had ties or allegiance to other secret societies?
Oh, yes. Well, that opens up the next big door. John Wilkes Booth was also, and Jesse was also a member of the Masons. So the Masons, I'll give you one clue, the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, was created by the Knights and the Masons. And there's one way you can know that. The Ku Klux Klan is 3 letters K. K, K, K. K is the 11th letter of the alphabet. Now, you don't need a calculator to multiply 3 times 11, but when you do, you get 33. 33 is the number of the top layer of the Masonic Lodge that controls Masonry worldwide. That's only one little incident. Maybe not significant, but I noticed they were very careful in picking 3 Ks. I wonder why, and I think that's the reason.
Interesting. Now, Albert Pike was, of course, a 33rd degree Freemason, and I believe he was tied with the Ku Klux Klan as well.
Yes, there's it's called Coyle's Encyclopedia, written by Henry Coyle. He's got a middle initial that didn't occur to me, but Henry Coyle and 2 others, all 3 of which were 33 degrees. And when you open it up to Albert Pike, it says now this is official. He was the chief judicial officer of the Ku Klux Klan. Now, that had to happen in 1867. While he was the leader of the worldwide Masonic movement, he was also the chief judicial officer of the KKK.
Interesting. Was he involved with the Knights of the Golden Circle, do you think?
That I can't find. I've never found that directly. And I can find no pictures of him giving the sign that others have given as being members of the Knights. So I can't say, but I do know that Stanton was a Mason.
Very, very interesting. Have you got anything else you can share on this with us?
Oh, absolutely. As long as we got more time, let's go back. Let's go back to 1876. Jesse James died in 1882. So this was while he was Clark, but he's still living under, in part, 22 different aliases. He was one of the men who, by 1876, one of the 100 men.
Sorry, what was the date there? Sorry, because that broke up, Ralph.
The date?
Yeah, the date you just gave.
1876. Jesse was born in 1847. So this was 19 years, or whatever it is, 30 years later. So he was already one of the 100 men who ruled America. Maybe not quite that bad, but he was powerful. So they decided, the 100 men who ruled America, they didn't want Custer to run for the presidency. Colonel George Custer. He was not a general. So Colonel Custer was encouraged to run for the presidency. And the man who told him to run, the men, presumably even Jesse James, went to him and said, listen, we can make you president. Colonel Custer learned about a treaty that the United States signed about the Black Hills. I think they're in North Dakota. And they were a site, a high site, or whatever it's called, for the Indians living in that area. And that was part of their territory. They didn't put wigwams or anything up there. They didn't live up there, but it was one of their top sites. And so we signed a treaty with the Indian tribes to keep white men out of it. And Custer learned that they were encouraging men to go into there, dig for gold. So Custer went to Washington, D.C., and tried to get them to stop this, to put a stop to it, put troops up there and evict these people. They were violating a treaty. Well, they didn't do anything about it, so Custer got blackballed for it. And so he went back home. I think he even lost his command of his unit when he was approached by the 100 men who felt that they better stop him because he was very popular with the people, but not with the people who ruled America. So they went to him and said, listen, Custer, we can make you president, but you'll need a major Indian victory, and then you come to Washington, D.C., and we'll make you president. So they got a general to order Custer to go into the Battle of Little Bighorn with 200, I'm going to use this figure, other people say it's different, but around 250, 270 soldiers. That's all he had. So he rode in there and was killed. Of course, all of those soldiers were killed. Now, Dalton said that he armed the Indians with 2,000 repeating rifles. 2,000 repeating rifles. Now, when you watch a movie, when you see Custer, and most of the movies have him standing up, proudly shooting a couple of pistols at and then reloading and firing again. And generally, you see in one of the movies, you'll see a man kneeling at his left side, and he's got a Springfield rifle, which is a single shot. And I'm going to do this the best. I can't illustrate it, but I'll just say, raise the rifle up, you find your target, pull the trigger, fire. And then if you're kneeling, you lay it down in the crotch of your lap, and then you open up the where that metal part is. There's a word for it. I can't think of it. Open it up, and then pull the cartridge out, reach in your pocket, get another one, put it back in there, and close it, and then raise it back up and fire it. Let's say it takes 5 seconds. In 5 seconds, an Indian with a repeating rifle could get off at least 5 shots. So he was not only fighting 2,000 Indians, he was fighting 10,000 Indians. In other words, they wanted him to be killed so that he didn't run for the presidency. They didn't want. And Jesse was right in the middle of it, handing out 2,000 repeating Winchester rifles. Then I found an article that said not only were the Springfields, when they fired 8 or 10 shots, they would jam. And the guy had to pry the cartridge out with a knife to put the next one in. So in other words, the weapons they had could not fire sustained volleys, 1 or 2, maybe 8 or 10 shots, and then it would jam, which further complicated the lives of Custer's soldiers when they knew that the Winchester would fire out I don't know how many shots without getting hot.
Very interesting. I mean, you're going to certainly have a lot of people interested in this because you've raised a lot of points I'm sure that most people would have never heard. So I think it's probably about a good time here to say, Ralph, where are people going to be able to get your DVDs from?
Okay, let's say it this way. It's going to be uploaded today's Monday, the 19th of February. It's going to be uploaded within the next couple of days. But there's 4 one-hour videos. So he's going to put all 4 of them up together. It's called Jesse James Lived to Be 103. Jesse James Lived to Be 103. Just in a couple of days, search it in your Google, whatever you use, Jesse James, and sit down. Now, please watch the whole thing. Don't conclude I'm crazy. Lunacy, I've never heard this before. Please commit yourself. If you want to be fascinated with stuff, there's more than the story than what I just told you. It's mind-boggling what I found out about this man and what he was involved with and how he got to where he was. And So I would urge you to consider 4 hours, one at a time, 1 hour apiece. Watch them over 4 days or whatever you got, or watch it half and stop it and come back later. Please give yourself, it's a fascinating study. And as I just pointed out at the very beginning, I'll end with this, that story in America is still alive about Jesse James. But all of the movies have him dying in 1882. Not one has said he lived to be 103 until that little known, unknown author, a Western guy living in the heat in Arizona named A. Ralph Epperson.
That sounds awesome. Now, can you tell them your website, Ralph?
Yes, it's Ralph, R-A-L-P as in Petunia, H, Ralph, dash, Epperson. Dash is up on your top layer, and then you make a dash between Ralph and the word Epperson, last name. E is in word, P is in Peter, ERSON.com. Please go there. Even if you don't go there to buy anything, I don't care about. Just browse and read. I discuss every one of the 30-some DVDs. I've got the 4 different books I've published. They're all available for you to buy. All the books are available on Amazon.com at your local bookstore, or you can go to my website and buy them. I give you options. I've reduced prices on everything at my website. You can maybe save money if you buy from me, but it's not essential. Just get in there and browse and read. You're going to learn things you've never heard before.
Fascinating. That's awesome. Well, Ralph, we'll certainly be wanting to have you back again on the A Minute to Midnight show because, you've got such a wealth of information. It's fascinating. Even for someone like me that doesn't live in America, it's absolutely fascinating, and you've certainly got my attention in terms of I'm going to be wanting to watch the Jesse James videos as well. So thank you very much for being on the show today, Ralph, and it won't be the last time, I'm sure.
You're very kind, Tony. Anytime I can be available. Let me say one more thing. I live in Tucson, Arizona. My phone number is listed on my website, in my home. I've got my home address. You can call me, write to me. I'm obviously on Skype, AZWriter1. You'll find me there. Call me, send me emails, messages. I'm available. I want to talk to you. You got questions or concerns, call me. Thank you very much, Tony. Anytime I can be of assistance, call me and let me know.
Awesome. Thank you, Ralph. Well, folks, if you enjoyed that, don't forget to give it the thumbs up on YouTube or on our website or wherever you're listening to it. You can find all of our shows on our YouTube channel as well as on our website, aminutetomidnight.com, and also on iTunes as an audio-only download. So, all of our shows are on the website. We also regularly put articles on there. We've had some new ones lately. It's worth going to the aminutetomidnight.com website and checking out the articles that we put there as well as our shows, and perhaps you might want to follow the website or bookmark it. We run A Minute to Midnight 100% by donations, and I want to say thank you to people that donate to us. Couldn't do it without your help. It's very much appreciated. And I write, play and record all the music in the shows too, by the way. So that's about it for this show. There'll be another one out in a few days' time. More very interesting shows coming up in the near future. So until then, this is Tony signing out. Have a great week and God bless.